Over to the cloud.
Hello, and welcome back to our podcast, Sherry Blair and Company, where we discuss social issues affecting the community at large. And now our host, Sherry Blair.
Shout out to Pete Davis for that amazing music. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, Sabella.
Thank you for having me.
Yay. I'm so honored and happy to see you online. We have a little shared story about how we met, right? But welcome everyone to Moving Beyond Military Sexual Assault, an amazing inspirational woman's story with Sabella Reyes. There she is. Just like a few things, there's a lot, many more accomplishments of Sabella. But first and foremost, thank you so much for serving for us. That's a major, big choice, and I know that I am very grateful to you for that. Sabella, in her 10 years of serving for us, served as 6 years as a victims advocate for the Sexual Assault Prevention and Response Team. So she's going to talk a little bit later about that role and this her own personal incident. I had the honor of meeting Sabella as my student, where she was. I was telling her I always looked at her as this, and I still do, as this strong, intelligent, powerful woman. And I can't always say that, you know, about everyone. There's some people are a little more timid and shy and not prepared, you know, and that was never the case with Sabella. So her articulation and her coming to class prepared and her intelligence just was always shining through, and her power. So she did acquire her Master's of Social Work from the University of California, Southern California, and she has a sub-concentration in military families and veteran services. And she proudly let us know she's a military spouse.
Yes.
Yeah. Welcome. Would you like to say a few words before we get going on some of our content?
I just want to thank everybody who is here, willing to listen to what I have to say in my story, my personal story and insight on military sexual trauma. Thanks to my family and my friends, and to everybody that's supporting the Sherry Blair Show.
Oh, awesome. I love seeing all the support that you have too. I keep forgetting her name, the actress that just won, and you just reminded me of her. It was on Beale Street. She got
Viola Davis.
Was that Viola Davis?
With the afro?
No,
yeah. I love the afro on the red carpet. I loved it.
Not Viola Davis, though. Viola Davis is How to Get Away with Murder, too.
Yes.
No, what's her name? Oh, anyway, she said, "This is what it looks like when love is poured into you."
Oh. And
you're reminding me of that with all the support. You had your brother on helping, and that is so important. So, you know, for those of you that don't know me, I have to, I do boatloads of positive psychology, so you will hear me jumping on any opportunity to focus on strengths and positivity at any moment. So I love that you mentioned how important, because getting support is key. We're going to move into just watching a little trailer, and then we'll discuss it briefly after on this topic, because Sabella and I were discussing that it's important that people also know the statistics as well, that we know what the data is. So without further ado, we are going to show that to you.
Everything changed the day that I was raped.
He hit me in the head and knocked me out.
I remember holding the closet thinking, what just happened?
A month later, I found out I was pregnant.
If this is happening to me, surely I'm not the only one.
16,150 service members were assaulted in 2009.
About 500,000 women have now been sexually assaulted in the U.S. military.
They let this man get away with everything but murder.
They gave him Military Professional of the Year award during the rape investigation.
They made it very, very clear if I said anything, they were going to kill me.
Most Americans assume that there is access to a system of justice.
You would think that because the military is about protecting our country, that certainly they would want to protect their own.
We're a country who needs every good soldier to make sure we have a strong military defense.
How many women are leaving the military because they've been sexually assaulted or raped?
Civilians see it as being a military problem.
Most rapists are repetitive criminals. They're here again and again.
They go on to literally prey on women and men, girls and boys in our neighborhoods back home.
When does this ever end?
It's very difficult to do a story on the most powerful institution in the world.
The Department of Defense has a history of covering up sexual offense problems. I don't know who you think elected you to defy the Congress of the United States. What is it you're trying to hide?
So, Sabella, I'd love to get your response, anything you wanted to say about the trailer or the movie itself, because I know you've seen the whole thing.
Yeah, I absolutely saw the entire documentary, and it was very heartfelt. I mean, unfortunately, most of what these, young ladies shared, I have heard before from my own victim survivors while I was operating in my role as a victims advocate for the SAPR team. And also for myself, like there was one young lady that spoke about her process with the VA and how she was trying to get compensated because she actually ended up with PTSD as a result of her military sexual trauma. And she was showing how difficult it was for victims of sexual military trauma to be compensated, I guess, or supported, after having PTSD versus the traditional wounded warrior amputee that, acquired PTSD from combat. And that's also something that, I shared with as well. I mean, this documentary is, like about 10 years ago, but there are a lot of the same issues, especially if, what happens after, getting that support, the counseling, all of that as far as recovering from that. It was very difficult and still is.
And exactly. I love that you mentioned the date of it, because the data has to be even more increased, right? And we also know something about data when it comes to sexual assault is that many women still don't even tell. So those numbers are very, we could say, deflated. Right. So, yeah, I mean, it's very compelling. It gives you, it makes you think, I got the goosebumps. And when I came across it, every time that I've watched it, even just to prepare for today, it still gives you the goosebumps, and it makes me angry in a healthy way. Like this is something, and I think you and I talked about this too, about that you trust, even if it's somebody you don't know, because you might go out into the field and you're going to trust that person with your life.
Absolutely.
So you would think that you could trust them in any environment. And I know we're going to get into that. So you know, these women are disclosing, and I know that it's very difficult. It takes a lot of courage to come forth and say what happened for a lot of reasons. So I was wondering if you might share with us, how did you come to this place to decide to, you know, to say it, to want to bring charges? Maybe you could share that with us.
Yeah, most certainly. So, unfortunately, my sexual assault, it happened while I was an E5 in the military. And it's important that I emphasize that because when it comes to military sexual assault in the military for females, the junior sailors or the junior personnel between the ranks of E1 to E4, they're the most vulnerable. So at this time, I was already in the military for almost 6 years when I was sexually assaulted. And I was sexually assaulted by a colleague who I guess was getting back at me because I had outperformed him. He was very jealous of me and he set me up, so to speak. And so with me being a sexual assault response team victims advocate, it was very uncomfortable for me to come out and say that I had been victimized by somebody at my command, a colleague, when I'm the one that people come to when this happens. I had already had mixed feelings about our system. You know, I'm an optimist, so I mean, part of me, you know, just felt like it was gonna get better, you know what I mean? Maybe it was the data that was necessary. Maybe we needed more people to report in order for us to advocate more. But the bigger part of me was, this system is working against the victims. Mm-hmm. And every time I accompany somebody at an NCIS investigation, every time I accompany somebody at a forensic exam, and I'm responding to, you know, those phone calls on the sexual assault hotline, and I'm wiping these people's tears away, in the back of my mind, I'm always thinking, you know, like, I really hope you get justice for this, but your chances are slim to none. You know, and so me coming out as a SAPR victims advocate saying, hey, I was sexually assaulted too today, you know, I was worried that I was going to contribute to that broken system.
Wow. So I would imagine how difficult it was for you to do the job. But then when this happened to you, I could see that as a contributing factors, you may be holding back from wanting to come forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it was also a little intimidating with me being a sexual assault victims advocate, because my reputation, I've always been told, very similar to what you think, which thank you again, but you know, that I'm just a strong, powerful woman. You know, I was in a position of leadership, the only female, you know, in my chain of command. I had people that I was responsible for, you know, and another thing that my own personal insecurity was, if I open my mouth and say this person did this to me, this is the same person who I'm literally neck and neck with in, you know, competition for recognition and awards. Are people going to think that I'm using my experience and my education to get back at him? Who's going to believe me?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. And that's what comes out all the time. And again, just so appreciative that you would take the time today to do this, because so many people say, who's going to believe me? Why should I bother? The system is rigged against me. They're going to drag me through the mud. They're going to make every other reason and excuse for why why this happened to you, other than putting it on the perpetrator. So I think that's so important that you're really raising awareness, and I appreciate that. We appreciate that collectively, right? This is for humanity, but that is so many reasons that just hold you back. So I could see when you share your story how you're in this situation and you're like contemplating, like, this is what happened, this is wrong, but if I go forward, then what? So if you can maybe take us a little further now into, once you did make that decision, what was it like? You mentioned something about knowing the system. Was there anything else, like maybe you could share before you go on? You actually told me this tribal knowledge of the system. Yeah. What was it that had you concerned about the system, knowing that you were in this role and trying to help other women? What was it specifically? And I think the trailer hit on some of that. What specifically was going on for you at this time?
Well, definitely the verbiage and the culture of our military policy. The Uniform Code of Military Justice had always placed the burden on the victim of having to prove this happened to them, as opposed to placing or shifting that burden on the perpetrator to prove it didn't happen. Okay, so that was extremely intimidating for most victims, because I'm sorry, people don't rape people on camera, right? So as far as having that evidence and being able to prove it, it was always extremely difficult, and in some way, I believe was discouraging. And so when I say tribal knowledge, I'm talking about how all of this anecdotal data is put out. And after this documentary aired about, oh goodness, look at what we're doing, the military, we have all of these people coming forward, all of these cases, all of these people are talking about their sexual assault. As you saw in this short video, the percentage of people that actually go to court-martial, and then the even smaller percentage of those who are convicted. And even with those convictions, Sherry, another thing that is misrepresented is how many of those convictions are sex crimes. Because in a lot of the times they walk away with, you know, different articles, you know what I mean, that are usually pertaining to like the collateral misconduct, you know, the drinking and you know what I mean, like all of the stuff that, you know, happened that night or whatever the case is. My perpetrator actually got sexual harassment as opposed to sexual assault, which his punishment was a letter of reprimand in his record. You know, so he was able to move on in his career. It was a slap on the wrist. Whereas me, I had an entire reputation that I was fighting to restore. And that is ultimately why I ended up leaving the military, because there was no fresh start for me.
Yeah, I mean, and you mentioned that. So you felt compelled that because there was no fresh start, I just need to get out of here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I actually terminated that assignment early. I requested permission to leave that assignment early. I went to a brand new ship that was being built from the ground up. And there were 5 men that went to that ship that were part of my investigation.
Oh, wow. And you, and that's a buzzword too, men.
Men.
And that's not to say that men don't understand or don't believe. So I don't want to say all men.
Absolutely. And I just want to be very transparent. My job in the military was completely male dominated. I was a mechanic. I was a hydraulic technician, you know, so everybody I worked with were men, you know, the majority were men. So, I mean, that's why men were the majority of, I think it was only men that were a part of my investigation.
And I think that speaks to more reasons why you would hesitate to come forward, because women in a male-dominated situation like the military or any other, you know, situation, workplace like that, where you're feeling this oppression, and whether you, we're going to talk about covert later on, but whether that's covert or overt, you still feel it. And you still feel like, oh, if I say something, how is this going to, you know, how is this going to come off? Is this going to be a good use of my time? Where is this going to put me? I mean, you talked about even being re-victimized once you came forward. So if you wouldn't mind, and I know that it must be so difficult to talk about this, but when you do it with such strength now. And that was another thing I think it's important to say. A lot of times we look at victims and we say, oh, they're survivors. I would have to say unequivocally, there's no way that you're a mere survivor. You are a thriver. You're beyond that. You are thriving. You are not letting this hold you back, stop your life, move forward to do positive and great things in the world. But at a certain point in time, before we get to thriving, we feel like we're just surviving. So I was wondering if maybe you could walk us through from the time that it happened and you questioned whether you should go forward or not. What was that like for you, you know, just being in that survival mode. Because survival mode is never, it's like survival mode is like treading water. At some point, if you don't learn how to swim, you're going to drown, right? And you're so not drowning. But at that point, you know, when we're just feeling we're surviving, it really sucks being in that place because you're kind of stuck in limbo. And you also talk about tonic immobility in your description of helping to bring that, to raise awareness. So I would love for you to share that with us if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I spent quite a bit of time contemplating if I should move forward or not. As a matter of fact, I didn't report my sexual assault until a year after. I had convinced myself that I was gonna, quote unquote, take one for the team. And I did continue to operate as a victim's advocate during that time. As a social worker now, I realize that was not the best idea. But I did continue to serve and help other victim survivors during that time. And I found myself in the position of having to give a command-wide training. So I had to train 2,000 people at my command with all of the new changes and policy changes, I guess, of the SAPR program. So I was in charge of organizing this. I had to break it down into groups. So I decided to do last names. And I found myself in the position of teaching and giving this training and encouraging people to go forward in their reporting and why it's important and what their rights are. And my perpetrator was in the audience. And I was so disgusted by his demeanor, you know, where I was just totally convinced that if I don't say anything, he's going to do this again. And I was so worried about the responsibility of the system. If I come forward, nobody else is going to come forward. You know, I'm going to break all of these spirits. You know what I mean? Like everybody, you know, I just had the world on my back. I had convinced myself. But when I saw his demeanor while I was giving this training, I was like, okay, I can't allow this anymore. So I decided to report that day. You know, it was me, I was being a hypocrite. I was telling these people they need to report. And I, in fact, had not even said anything about my sexual assault from a year ago. And my perpetrator is still here. Now, I don't think my situation is as unique as it may sound, as far as me being able to see my perpetrator every day for over a year after it happened. But I was sexually assaulted as a child as well, and my perpetrator was my stepfather. So I had unfortunately already been conditioned to see my perpetrator every day, to go on about my business, you know what I mean, and continue to function. And so I think that's another thing that made it very difficult for me personally, was just, you know, oh, well, you don't look like a victim. You weren't acting like a victim whenever the investigation started. So that was very difficult to deal with. Also, after I reported during the investigation, my perpetrator ended up, you know, going to a different command, because at this point we had been separated. You know, it had been put out, this is what happened. The command decided to keep me there. He relocated. Well, at that point, he was under a new commanding officer. And one of the very distinctive differences about military sexual trauma versus civilian sexual trauma, and I will never discredit anybody's, you know, experience, because sexual assault is difficult no matter what uniform you wear, whatever. But I think it's important for our listeners to understand that whenever a sexual assault happens in the military, it would be the same as you going to work, being sexually assaulted by a coworker, and then your boss has the authority to say, we're going to call the cops or not. Okay. So in my case, my commanding officer was already very, very familiar with me and my perpetrator. You know, he was the golden boy. I was the golden girl. You know what I mean? We were, like I said, we were the top two, you know, when it came to the ranking boards and what have you. And so it was extremely uncomfortable. And once he was gone, I had to convince his commanding officer, his new commanding officer, to take on my case. And He did not want to. He had only had my perpetrator under his command for 3 months. He didn't really know much about him. And initially, you know, he wanted to protect him. He wasn't sure. He didn't know me. He didn't know the circumstances. He didn't know the situation. And so he was like, I don't want to get involved. Which to me was also discouraging, because it was like, wouldn't you want to get the information before you make a decision, as opposed to turning your head away just because you hear that your sailor was a part of this. So I had to write a letter to his commanding officer, begging him to consider my case for NJP, which is non-judicial punishment. And then when he turned that away, I had to go above him to the ISIC, his commodore. So I had to go to the commanding officer's boss, and I had to write a letter to them, pleading my case and explaining to them what this man had done to me, what it had done to my reputation, the person that I am now, what this represents. What is going to happen if you allow this guy to get away with this? You know what I mean? What is it going to do for the entire system? And eventually they were like, okay, we will NJP him. They did. He got a letter of reprimand in his record because he was founded for sexual harassment, not sexual assault, because in his NCIS interview, he slipped up and told them that he gossiped around the command saying that he had sex with me that night, even though he didn't. And so that's why we were able to get him for sexual harassment. But that was by nothing that I had or nothing that I had said or done. So if he didn't make that mistake, you know, he would have just got away with it pretty much. And so that
one thing, you used an acronym, and I'm not sure we're all familiar with it. You said the
NJP, which is non-judicial punishment.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted clarity for myself and the audience.
Mm-hmm.
So if he hadn't made the mistake, and I just think before you go on, there's a couple important points that I appreciate you bringing up. Your courage to me to even talk about being victimized by your own stepfather. Again, you continue to really be such a beacon of light and truth and power, and I just want to appreciate that again. That's another situation that people don't understand also. Everybody's situation is unique also. I think you did a really great job at describing that analogy. If this happened in your workplace, it wouldn't be in a civilian situation, in a corporate situation, right? That your boss is going to decide whether charges are pressed or not, or the police are called, which actually really gives that commanding officer too much power, right? So I think we're going to be talking about that as we wind down at the end about what's going on with the system. But I think that analogy is so important because there's all different situations that hold us back. But getting back to that other disclosure that you talked about, being abused as a child, you're right. You've already been conditioned. You use the spot-on psychological term. You learn that, well, I better be quiet. Or you also, I think another thing that's really key here is the betrayal of trust. When somebody does this to you and you trust them, as a child, you wouldn't have known that was wrong. You especially a very young child. I mean, and then you start to get a feeling that it's wrong, but they're betraying your trust. I'm not saying for your situation, but for many children, they trust that person who's supposed to love and protect and take care and nurture them. And then when they're unfortunately abusing them, most pedophiles are very good at not making it an unpleasant experience so that they can continue to have access to the child. So you're right that you, in a way, learned to be quiet. And even though you got help and also moved on beyond that, those tentacles of things we learn when we're very young, they still often have a hold on us, even if we don't realize it. Mm-hmm. So I feel like, again, like the way that you have now reflected back on all of this, I'm sure you were thinking about all of this during that 1 year. I can't even imagine what that 1 year was like waiting to tell, and then when you did tell, what you had to go through. But that's a very important point, that being re-victimized, it actually is a higher percentage of anyone that's been victimized once. It is a higher percentage to be re-victimized again, especially if it happened as a child. So thank you again for sharing and educating, because it's so important that we understand these pieces.
Also, as far as the tonic immobility, so the advocacy that I had was been a part of in terms of tonic immobility is I simply wanted tonic immobility to be recognized or considered as evidence in military sexual trauma. Now, tonic immobility is what a lot of people refer to as freezing, right? It is that involuntary psychological response where your body becomes extremely just immobile whenever fear and physical restraint come together. Okay. Now, before in the past, it was, I feel like personally, and again, all the information that I'm talking about, I'm keeping it as anecdotal as possible because I don't want to turn this into a presentation or make it too formal because we're talking about me. But from what I have seen, tonic immobility in sexual trauma has been used against the victim. And as opposed to it being recognized as this involuntary psychological body response, it's being looked at as, oh, she didn't fight back.
Great.
And that's something that I have had many, victims of military sexual trauma, share or talk about, how it's not fair. No, I didn't fight back, but I didn't have a choice. You know what I mean? I didn't fight back because I could not fight back, and that's when we start seeing a lot of the same symptoms and, post-traumatic stress disorder, that out-of-body experience and, all kinds of stuff happening. And also moral injury. I think when a lot of people think of moral injury in terms of the military veteran population, they think of the father that is at combat that has to shoot and kill a 12-year-old that has a bomb. Moral injury isn't necessarily just that. There are unfortunately many people who are fleeing sexual violence from home and they join the military, and that's what I was talking about. I didn't realize how unique or I guess my situation wasn't as unique as I thought, because I had met so many people in the military that had joined the military fleeing domestic violence, fleeing sexual assault, and then it happens to them again after we are adults now and we made these promises to each other that we'll never let anybody hurt us again, we'll never let that happen again, and it does. That is the equivalent to the father out in combat that shot the 12-year-old kid.
I think you could still hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. Just a little check there. Another thing that I think, you're bringing the family situation, and in your situation, you knew this perpetrator, like we discussed, and you trusted him. Was there any point that you were thinking also, and it might not be true for you, but this is true, and I wonder if you could speak to this, if maybe other people that you served talked about this issue of blaming yourself?
Absolutely. I had a couple drinks that night. He had a couple drinks that night. There was a level of intimacy before the sexual assault encountered. Like I said, I had a boyfriend at the time, and I blame myself for the situation because I went into the situation with spite. I had just graduated with my associate's degree. My boyfriend at the time did not want to celebrate with me. And here was this guy that was willing to do that. So I wanted to teach my boyfriend a lesson. Yeah, I want to teach my boyfriend a lesson. And so me allowing him to kiss me is not giving him permission to take advantage of me.
Absolutely.
And I made it very clear that was all I was comfortable with. Later on, he ended up taking advantage of me. And it was very difficult for me to not accepting and clean up the house. Because before it was like, oh, well, you know, you put yourself in this position. You know, how many times have you had a victim survivor come to you telling you that they were drinking and they got taken advantage of? You know what I mean? Like, you know better, you know, and honestly, the culture of the military when it comes to sexual trauma, the focus is a lot of the time on that, what they call collateral misconduct. You have a victim survivor who is underage and they were intoxicated during the time of the sexual assault. There is so much attention and light and focus on that, the fact that she was underage drinking, as opposed to her being sexually assaulted. So it was, I think, just a natural response, or me trying to get ahead of that criticism or the stigma, you know what I mean, that I felt or I anticipated, you know, was going to come, you know, after I spoke up. So it was kind of like I was just beating them to it. And it kind of suppressed me and, again, kept me from coming forward. And I think a lot of our, you know, victim survivors, they deal with that, even the people that aren't reporting.
For a lot of those reasons, again, like you, all of these variables lead up to why we don't tell. And that's been the big conversation in this whole Me Too movement.
Yes.
A lot of people behind the scenes, men and women. It's not like all women are sticking up for the Me Too movement. Some women are like, you know, why didn't they why didn't they come forward? Or, well, maybe they, you know, it's their own fault. And I think it's an important message to understand. And one of the things I feel passionate about is educating. But even a young person has to understand, whether it's in a heterosexual, any kind of a homosexual relationship, even if you two get to the point where you're both naked, and because this is where you feel it might be going, if one of you decides at any moment that I don't want to go any further, no means no, stop means stop. Because that does happen. That's natural. We might be thinking, oh, you know, we might be physically responding, you know, and then we realize, no, I don't want to do this. And we need to realize, and everyone needs to realize, that that's where it needs to stop. And I'm not by any way saying that that is what happened with everyone to Sabella and her incident, but it is what happens in some other incidents. So regardless of you having those couple of drinks and, you know, and that does happen sometimes, you know, that a kiss might be shared. But again, those are no reasons why it should have gotten to a point where you were sexually assaulted against your will.
Right.
But it's another variable, right, that does come up, that we blame ourselves because the whole rest of the world is going to pin that on us, or the victim, right? Like that, this is because, well, you shouldn't have had a drink. You shouldn't have done this. You shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have worn this.
Yes.
For women too, it's like, what were you wearing even? Or what were you not wearing, right? So I think that's a very, very important point. Thank you for bringing it up.
Absolutely.
Before we start talking about what's happening now, was there anything else you'd like to share with us before we start talking about what's going well with the system, what your recommendations are, and, you know, we have something special to talk about toward the end. Is there anything else you would want anyone in the audience to know?
I mean, not necessarily. I think that it's just important for survivors, victim survivors, to focus on the facts. I think a lot of the time we get caught up in the hindsight bias, the shoulda, woulda, couldas. Mm-hmm. But you making the best decision that you could have with the information that you had at that point in time. If this person made you feel comfortable and you felt safe at that point in time, that you should not beat yourself up or try to find ways to blame yourself for what happened to you. It is so important for us to be able to focus on the facts and what happened and not what should have happened, because I think a lot of the time that keeps us from healing.
Really powerful advice. And if you could speak a little bit about the support that you had from family, friends, colleagues, how important was that when you first told them?
It was extremely important because, like I said, embarrassingly enough, my family did not know what happened to me until I had opened my investigation. And then some of them didn't even know about the investigation. They didn't know until I was in the process of discharging from the military when the VA requested those character witness statements. I had to give them this quick, hey, this is what happened to me in the military. I know that, you knew me before it happened, you know me after it happened, and I really just need you to pretty much talk about the changes that you've seen in me and our communication or whatever the case is. I'll talk to you about it later. Okay, bye. There wasn't a lot of pushback. My family was extremely supportive, my mom especially, and I know it definitely hurt her probably more so than ever because she didn't know until after.
Right.
And so I just, I'm just very grateful that I didn't have anybody that stopped the process and wanted to know more information. Everybody allowed me to say what I was comfortable with. Nobody pushed me to do it. Mm-hmm. And so I was extremely grateful for that. That was extremely, extremely helpful because I wasn't ready to talk about it at the time.
Take a moment. Do you have that water I asked you?
Yes.
This is me taking care of you. Take a sip. And, that this is never easy to talk about again, but I think what you're also getting into the raw and powerful emotion of love.
Absolutely.
Yes.
These are happy tears. I just want to, these are happy tears, and I'm so blessed.
Yes.
So blessed to have so much support and everybody allowing the ball to be in my court. Mm-hmm. Talk about it when I was ready to share what I was comfortable sharing, and not condemn me, not make me feel like, oh, well, you could have did this better, or you should have did this better, or I raised you better, you should have known. There was none of that. None of it. Everybody was extremely supportive throughout the investigation and thereafter.
And that beautiful show of emotion that you have, that is about love. That's when love is being poured into you.
Yes.
And I think that's important for other people to know. I mean, one of the things we could hope from this conversation today is that other people will find their path toward healing and toward coming forward. Even if it happened 20 years ago, if you've been carrying that, you might not want to consider, charges or anything like that, but it's about giving voice and truth to the situation and really letting it go for you and to have that support system around you.
Absolutely.
So more great advice. So what do you think is going well in the military in terms of sexual assault, and what do you think they could do better now?
Okay, so I am actually very excited about some of the initiatives and changes in military policy that have transpired since I've been discharged. I have seen a complete shift in how the UCMJ is handling military sexual assault, and now I'm seeing that the perpetrators are actually on the other end of that burden of having to prove that this did not happen, as opposed to the victims proving that this did happen. Now that the shift has occurred, I'm like, oh goodness, like this, this could be a recipe for a disaster, just because now we really do have to focus on balancing that burden. And I honestly believe that the best way to do it is to make sure that we are rendering more harsh punishment for false accusation. And I'm not talking about people that were sexually assaulted, they go through the trial process, it's founded that, okay, the sexual assault didn't happen. I'm talking about the people that are using military sexual assault in some type of malicious way, shape, or form. They're doing this out of spite, or they're trying to hurt somebody with false accusations. Mm-hmm. I have unfortunately seen a very small percentage of people that make false accusations. But the only thing that I've ever seen happen to them was they get, kicked out of the military. That's it. While the other person is left having to restore their reputation. And I don't think that's fair. So I think that would be a great way to try to balance that. Also, another great thing I'm excited about as far as what the military is doing right, there is a new article, I think it's Article 93, where they have actually paid attention to the conflict of interest between relations with recruits or trainees and instructors or military recruiters. There was a lot of military sexual trauma incidents and cases that, derived from these types of relationships, and then also a lot of consensual, fraternization that came from that as well. So before, they would be tried under Article 92, which was failure to obey a regulation, but now that has its own article. So I thought that was awesome that they actually changed that. Another change that I'm really excited about as far as military policy in the UCMJ is they have reformed Article 134. Now, Article 134 is the catch-all general article. So this is the let's throw whatever at the wall and whatever sticks will go with type of article. It was very generalized. And there are, in fact, quite a few, I guess you could say, violations that they've removed from that article, and they've either given their own, which like Article 92, they're giving their own article, or they, added them to different articles, which I think was pretty awesome. I think that definitely the military has definitely shifted to holding people accountable for more specific violations as opposed to the generalized. And I think that is going to shift the entire culture of the military for the best.
I can pick up on your energy that you feel some kind of vindication that at least voices are being heard. And now I see the confirmation in your smile. So that is, I actually think, if I'm not mistaken in that trailer, I think there's another USC student in that trailer with the blonde hair. I think she was in my class, and she was going to Washington to petition a lot. We have just a few minutes, and there's some questions. You could feel free to answer or pass whatever you want to. We have a question. What was the hardest part of your recovery process?
Oh, the hardest part of my recovery process was the moral injury. It was me getting over the fact that I had established myself as this strong person that was not broken, regardless of what I had been through as a child. And that part of me was over. I had completely disconnected, like, this is who I am today. And then for me being 25, 26 years old, being sexually assaulted again. It was very difficult for me to not blame myself for that, because I have this history and I know the signs and all, because every perpetrator is the same, I had all of this unrealistic information that I allowed myself to just soak in, and it really stopped me from healing. It stopped me. It wasn't that it made it difficult. It wasn't until I had said, okay, I'm ready to deal with this. I have to deal with this now. That's when I was open to slowly removing that and allowing myself to really face the facts.
The issue around that, as actually someone who has worked with victims of sexual assault and different forms of violence, I'm also trained in EMDR. I'm sure you've heard of that, eye movement desensitization reprocessing. But the key point, and I'm very cognitively oriented, that's the one thing that I would like people to know, that we often are not. I think that's a great question, whoever asked what was the hardest part, because we get these thoughts in our head that use the word unrealistic. They're irrational, actually. It's my fault. I'm damaged. I'm broken. So those are the things that we need to work on unraveling, because they're the things that lead to the unhealthy negative emotion and the self-defeating behaviors. So once we can get to those beliefs, the healing can really accelerate. because that's what we have to undo. I mean, we can really do a tough job with our thoughts in our mind.
Yes.
What was the hardest part? Okay, that was asked. Do you have any regrets about coming forward?
I have zero regrets coming forward.
Awesome.
I think that not coming forward is a form of secrecy. And I think that when you keep secrets, you give that negative vibe, those negative thoughts, those stuck points, you give them power. And I actually feel like me coming forward actually expedited my healing.
Yes, absolutely. Because it liberates you. You know, I think I mentioned that before. If for anyone that's listening, if you've been holding on to something like this, you've got to get it out of you. Even, you know, I so appreciate that you let your tears out. I mean, people don't realize, I always say tears are the counterbalance to laughter. Tears cleanse our soul, our spirit. But believe it or not, there's toxins in your tears. And if you hold them in, it's no good for you, like literally. We have another message. Individuals who have left the military for over 20 years, it moved up a little bit, and would like to begin the process of talking about their experience. What advice would you provide, and what is the first step in beginning the process for them, even if they've held it back? Because let's say 20 years ago, they probably weren't ever talking about it. You know, we hopefully we're talking about it more and more. What advice would you give to somebody that's been holding it as a first?
I'm assuming that talking about it, I'm assuming that the person wants therapy, or
if they decided to come forward, I guess the question is, what's the first step?
Okay, yes. Okay, so yeah, absolutely. You would definitely, I recommend going on to the va.gov website and finding the number for your your local VA hospital. There, the VA has social workers on staff that are willing to give therapy. I would ask for a consultation. All you have to do is call the number, call the operator, let them know that you're wanting to speak to a counselor about seeking some possible therapy. And you would actually get an appointment where you can sit down with the general counselor. You will do an assessment, right? And then from there, they will determine which clinic you would go to. Like me, I did not realize that I was going to be seen at the PTSD clinic. After I did my assessment, I thought that there was maybe a department designated for military sexual assault, just because everybody was talking about it so much, and that wasn't actually the route that I went through. And I'm actually glad that that is the route that they chose, because I was able to do cognitive processing therapy, and that actually would help me as far as me recovering. So the VA actually treated my case as they would a PTSD case.
Wonderful. And that's a great resource for people to know about. Okay, the last question we're going to take, only because I want to respect everyone's time and be sure that we honor that we said we would be from 2 to 3. The last question is, do you think this will make more people come forward about their experience?
I have realized that more people are coming forward, but I think that from what I see, and this is just my opinion, from what I see, it seems to be a lot more beneficial when people are in a veteran status, meaning they've already discharged from the military. If you are coming forward because you're looking for justice or revenge or what have you, I would say, keep in mind that the system is still changing, and, it may not be working as fast, as we would like. But if you're coming forward because you want to heal, then I would say focus on your healing. Don't worry about the judicial process. Don't worry about what this person or that person is going to get away with. Focus on what's best for you. There are so many veterans that have been discharged, that are coming forward, that are getting that healing, because now we have the time to. I remember in the military, they were like, oh, you were raped. You can go to counseling. Okay, thank you. Counseling can only be between these times, and you got to come back to work after. So I would literally go to counseling, have this 1-hour session, crying, a mess, and then I have to return back to working time.
No.
So it was always the mission first.
Right.
I have realized that it has worked a lot better for me because my healing has happened in a veteran status where I get to put me first.
That's important, me first. You know, and again, I'd like to mention that as someone who works with people who have been traumatized or dealing with violence, actually, we always recommend not having an appointment before you go to work. Maybe not having it on, you know, sometimes even having it on Friday afternoon after work is better, because then at least you can rest and process and feel over the weekend, because sometimes it's very difficult to go to work after all that stuff is coming up.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a really great point. Oh, we're not watching. Go back. So as you know, today, this was a free event to raise awareness. That's what we wanted to do. And Sabella said, I asked, is there a donation in case anyone wanted to make one? And some of you did. I think we've collected, the last time I saw it, close to $100. And I know that some other people were saying they wanted to donate. So could you just give a little shout out and tell us what Combined Arms is that you asked for those donations?
Absolutely. Combined Arms is one of my favorite veteran organizations. It's a nonprofit organization, and it is a resource hub for military veterans here in Houston, Texas. Now, I'm talking about the building in Houston, Texas. They have a huge network where they work with veterans all over the nation, okay? But what I love about it is they help veterans with any issue possible. Now, when I was working at the jail, we would have a lot of veterans that were coming into jail and they were homeless or whatever the case was. Combined Arms always had resources to help get people housing that day, whatever it is that they had to do. And what I love even more about it is most of the staff are military veterans. So it's veterans helping veterans. They offer peer support. They help, again, with reconnecting people to the VA for their benefit, appealing their discharge codes, what have you. They are on the front lines. They are coming back for all of our brothers and sisters that are in need of any type of help. So all of those veterans that are around that don't have the family support that I do, you know what I mean? You do have a family. You do. And accessing the network at Combined Arms is definitely what I recommend to any veteran out there that needs some help and they don't know where to start.
Again, you know, you make me smile. Your spirit and your power, just as you're talking about this, you know, it just is radiating off. You know, I'm here in Jersey. I could feel it from Texas. And, you know, it's just something beautiful about that spirit of yours. So, you know, in the spirit of this being your voice has power, use it to support survivors. And that's no matter whether you know somebody, you know, encourage them. This is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So please support survivors so that they get to the place thriving. Now, before we go, I would love for Sabella to share a little bit about something that she derived and came up with when I was her professor. It was a couple years ago now already, right? And I loved this, you know, when I found out what was going on. And then this is a concept and a business. So I would love to, you give a little shout out about your business and why you gave it the name, and how people, if they would like to contact you about this product, please tell them how.
Absolutely. I'm actually going to put my email address in the chat right now.
Awesome.
So my organization is called Covert Beauties. And I am a certified makeup artist that actually was also a part of my healing. Art therapy was also something that worked for me. So my canvas was the face. So because I feel like a lot of victims in the military, or victims period, they are consumed with the burden, you know, of, you know, shame and guilt, what have you. I think that it's important that we have a platform, somewhere safe, where people can talk about what happened, how they healed, what they're struggling with, whatever the case is, because everybody has a story. So I came up with this idea to start an eyelash line. And as you can see, my eyelash box looked like a book, a storybook.
I love it.
This is actually the chapter 1 lash, okay? Chapter 1. The name of this book is called Never Judge a Book by Its Covert. And chapter 1 is me actually launching my story about military sexual trauma and what my experience was. I have quite a few individuals who are willing to participate. I have people already working on their stories where their identities are being protected. They're going to be identified as the title of the story of which they get to name. But essentially, it's all about being able to talk about what you've been through, your story, as easily as somebody asking you, where'd you get your eyelashes from?
I love it. And for those of you that are listening and wouldn't see a chat, the email address to contact Sabella if you wanted to learn more about these amazing eyelashes, with a powerful cause and a story behind it. The email is Covert Beauties, COVERT Beauties, BEAUTIES, all one word, at gmail.com. Thank you. I'm sure that we have you on mute, but I'm sure that everyone's clapping and singing your praises. Thank you so much for coming and talking with me. It's been so wonderful and heartwarming to me to be able to reconnect with you after we spent 4 months in a class together. And I hope this isn't the end of our relationship. I'd love to see you again. Everybody, we wish you a beautiful rest of your weekend. And we'd always love to hear from you. This is going to be, the recording will be released and then also uploaded on my podcast. So if you want to listen to it, you'll be able to find it there. Right now it's on iTunes and Spotify. But thank you so much, everyone. And have a great rest of your weekend.